Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Welcome back to the show. Jim Ramsey joining us here again today live on the Zoomcast as well as the podcast. We are excited to have him back here as a professional of the year to talk more about all the work he does in the marriage counseling business, helping so many families and couples for so many years. So first and foremost, Jim, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
Doing fine, thanks.
Well, it's excited to see you back here. I know it's been a little hiatus on both of our ends, and just to do a quick introduction to tell our new time listeners a little about the work you're doing to start, I'd appreciate it.
Well, just same thing I've been doing for 50 years, working with couples every week, all week, trying to help people make their marriage work.
And
And I
you're
found,
from Aletheia Marriage Counseling, so that's the website if they want to go visit you. Could I spell that for them?
sure.
ALETHEIA MARRIAGECOUNSELING.com. So AletheaMarriageCounseling.com. And if you go there, you're going to find out more information about the work he's doing. And of course, for today's show, we're lucky enough to have him here live and to talk more about his background and, of course, the work that he's been doing with so many. And, working with couples, clearly I know we've talked about fighting, we've talked about things that upset each other, and these are all part of marriage. Give us an overview of the type of people that come to you.
Regular people come to me, people that just find that over the years, they find themselves more and more isolated from each other. They feel kind of emotionally disengaged and lonely because they're putting so much time and energy into their work and in their children. And then they get into vicious circles where they hurt each other's feelings and they get into conflict. And, they need to have proper skills. They need to know how to process things. And the average person doesn't know how to do that.
It's so true. And there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot that you guide people through because not everybody knows how to, well, express themselves. And then, we talked a little bit about, when you get upset with each other as a couple, him and her become defensive. There's a little bit of give and take with that, right?
Right. A lot of it. Yeah.
And a lot of times some people, want to talk. And for example, a husband, sometimes, or a woman too, a wife could become defensive, right? When the wife says it's time to have a talk. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think that there's a lot to be said about really understanding how the other person is hearing things. For example, generally, when a woman wants to talk, it's because there's been a buildup of uncomfortable feelings. She's been feeling less and less connected to him, less and less important to him. There are various nonverbal things that have happened that kind of put her on edge. Like not kissing her goodbye when he leaves in the morning, or not complimenting her hairdo or new dress, or he seems preoccupied. He seems over focused on other things. And after there's a certain amount of that, she wants to talk. She wants to be reassured that everything's okay. But the problem is, by that time, she's emotional. And when a man hears his wife say, "We need to talk," and sees that look on her face, he feels like I've done something wrong because it's just the tone of voice and the look on her face is like, "Oh no, here we go." And so if he starts feeling kind of defensive, he's geared to do the wrong thing in this conversation. He's going to try to straighten her out, or help her stop feeling that way by telling her it's not really that bad, or it's not true, or and all those kind of things just discount her feelings, make her feel like she's not being heard because he's defensive, he's reactionary. And so what she can do differently is start more carefully. Honey, I really would like to talk with you. I feel like I just want to get close to you. She's coming on kind and kind of sweet. And honey, I was wondering, we haven't gone for a big date for a long time. I would just love to go to that special restaurant in town. Something like that where he can make her happy. When a man feels like I can do something that works, he's all for it. But if he feels like no matter what I do, she's going to be upset and she's going to get more upset, well, then it's hard. So
Oh,
that's one example.
all right. Do you want to share any more?
Well, I think a lot of times the problem that gals have from a man's point of view, of course, is they say too much. If she says, I just need to spend some more time with you, or can we do this, or can we do that? But instead of that, she has to say, because you never, or because you always. And she's explaining why she feels that way, but the
Uh,
process of doing that puts the issue on his problem. Yeah, he's got a problem because you're not this or you're always that. And if you stop saying that explanation part and just ask for what she wants, she'll get a better answer. And then when he does it, thanks, babe. I really
yeah.
appreciate that. Fun. But you got to get off on the right foot.
And you mentioned, well, this vicious cycle, is that what you're calling the four horsemen of the apocalypse? What is that about?
Well, the four horsemen of the apocalypse that they found in the Gottman research is the classic vicious circle. It's the worst one. It's most associated with divorce. And to name the four, it's the first one is perceived criticism or blame. The second one is defensiveness. Third one is basically talking down to somebody, contempt. And the fourth one is stonewalling. But the thing that people don't realize is each of these four horsemen are perceived by the listener. I perceive her to be critical
Hmm.
or blaming. She may be just emotional and just wants to talk about her feelings, but I'm already feeling like she's going to criticize or blame me because of the look
Yeah.
on her face, tone of voice, or whatever. And that's going to set me up to do the second one, which would be perceived by her as defensive. In my mind, I'm just trying to explain something. I'm trying to fix something. I don't think I'm defensive. I'm just trying to answer what you're saying, but it comes across defensive. And so
Interesting.
each time as we react to what we think is going on, which is not intended by the other person, it sets them up to react. And then we react to their reaction. And the fourth one is stonewalling. And that's a man who just shuts down, doesn't want to talk anymore, and looks to her like he doesn't care about my feelings. He doesn't want to hear me talk. But the truth is, he's seeing her get more and more upset, and he's beginning to get upset. We call that flooding. And he doesn't want to make it worse. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. He stops talking because he loves her and doesn't want it to get worse. But to her, it looks like you don't care. And so the problem is we're always misperceiving and reacting to each other.
So how do you fix it? Where do you start?
Okay. The first place to start is with the very first horseman. If you stop that one, the other
Okay.
three don't show up. And so this thing of perceiving that somebody's being critical or blaming me, I've got to recognize that's my perception. Okay. So I can either react to my perception or I can hide it and not feel like, not even let them know I reacted, or I can ask for more information. I can be curious. Hey, could you explain more what you're talking about there? Or I could be kind of forthright. I know you don't mean it that way, but it just feels kind of like you're being critical. Is there something bothering you? The point is, I should come across curious, not defensive. And as she talks, I want to know more. And then I begin to show compassion. But see, the guy is not on her wavelength, which is emotional. He's on his cognitive wavelength. He's trying to explain everything. And she feels that that's fixing it. You're trying to fix me. And women hate that, because they want to be heard and they want to discharge the stuff that's been building up emotionally that needs to be processed and understood.
Oh, my first time ever hearing of this. So I'm learning as well, and I hope a lot of our listeners are. If you are just tuning in, we're talking to James Ramsey here. By the way, you're based out of Montana, correct?
That's
And
correct.
your marriage counseling services, is it just in
Yeah.
your state?
Yes, no, I'm working with people calling me across the state, but also outside the state and even
Beautiful.
outside the country. So yeah.
You are worldwide at this point.
Mhm.
All right, great. Well, also, let's talk about maybe the most important relational skill that a husband should practice, maybe in order to avoid his wife's, perceiving him as being defensive or always trying to fix their problems. What is that about?
Well, when I'm talking to men, they're mystified because they really want to make their wife happy. They want to help. And for the most part, I mean, there's some selfish toads that don't, but most guys care and they want to help. But the problem is, it just seems like she's always upset, and it feels like I'm not doing good enough or I'm not successful. Men are big into competency. They want to be good at what they do, especially as a husband. And so if she seems always emotional, then I find myself trying to explain that that's not really what I meant, or that's not what I did, or trying to get her to stop being emotional. Okay, now, so you asked me the question, what's the most important skill a man needs to learn? He needs to understand that he needs to be curious about what she's feeling so she can talk about what she's feeling. And just know that that's what needs to happen right now. She needs to discharge a lot of things that are bothering her that are kind of built up. And so, honey, is there anything else? What's going on? And just be curious and then be compassionate as she talks about things that upset her, rather than thinking, well, that's not that, try to calm her by, well, that's not that big a deal, or don't worry about it. No, 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 no. Let her get it out and identify it. So you've been really feeling hurt, or you've been feeling unappreciated. And then she'll begin to get more emotional. And that's actually good, because what's happening is she's getting this thing out. And there's a point where you say, wow, no wonder she's so upset. Because I keep asking, I learn more and more, and I realize, oh, so this past week, nobody's been appreciating you. You've been feeling just beat up all over the place. And then she starts crying because she got it out and it was understood by an important person, namely her husband. Then I hold her and I pat her and say, honey, I'm so sorry. I love you. I'm sorry that's happening to you. That's catharsis. That's healing. I was the guy that helped her feel that way. She feels connected to me. Success. I calmed her down.
Well,
Men don't know how to do that.
but they can learn.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I tell men, look, why pay big bucks to send your wife off to a counselor? 90% of the people that go to counselors are women, and they usually see men. Why? Because they want to be heard. They want to get things out, and they don't want somebody telling them that they shouldn't feel this way. And the more they feel heard and understood, the better they feel. It was worth the money. But I say to him, look, you can learn that skill. That's no toughie. Just listen to her and understand her, and don't spend the $150, and she'll love you instead of him. If you don't want him falling in love with a therapist somewhere, that's what another problem that happens in therapy.
Wow, that's happened. I've heard about that, but is that more
Transference
common
and
than
counter.
tell
Oh
me?
yeah, transference and countertransference. She begins to think she's in love with him, and he begins to feel flattered that she needs him and so forth because he's got problems at home, whatever. And that happens, and men lose their license, and it's a bad scene. But I felt early in my work, I don't want to be sitting in an office with a woman by myself week after week, tell me her problems. I'd rather help her talk to her husband, and most importantly, help the husband be the good listener. So I started working with couples right off the bat because I just didn't want to go that other route. That makes some sense to you? It's a
Totally.
business decision.
Oh my goodness. Well, let me
Yeah, so
ask you
I'd
this
teach
now.
husbands how to be therapists. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, no, it's okay. You've mentioned to me, but for new time listeners, tell us who John Gottman is and all about that and how, yeah, tell us about that before we, go any further, because I know you studied under him. Is that true?
Oh yeah, well I worked under John Gray most of his glory years. He was writing all those Mars Venus books, and I was one of his therapists. And I did workshops all over the state, and I did the military outside, across the country, and outside the country, and so forth. Then John Gottman's work came along, and I began reading it. And I saw, oh, he's starting to get therapists on board with him. So I got on board. I've been with him almost 20 years now as a fully certified therapist. So I've learned from both of these guys. Both of them were really skillful and insightful. And of course, John Gottman was a research scientist before he ever became a therapist. He was studying animals, and he started studying people because he wanted to get married. He didn't want to get divorced. So we got a lot of help now. A lot of people don't know how much different marriage counseling is today than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. Night and day difference.
Tell us how. Give me some examples. I want to know. I'm curious.
Okay, for one thing, the average therapist shies away from marriage counseling because they perceive it to be emotionally upsetting, which it generally can be.
Can be.
They're upset, they want to fight with each other, they want to referee. Well, so therapists say, well, I want a lot of business, so I'll do different kinds of counseling.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to have variety and so forth, have a full caseload. And if I have to, I'll do some marriage counseling.
Okay.
They do some, so they call themselves a marriage counselor, but they're primarily focused as an individual therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. We need individual therapists, but it's a whole different ballgame. If you're going to be a marriage therapist, you're going to be a teacher and a coach as well as a supportive listening counselor. You have
Yeah.
to have rapport, obviously, but
Okay.
you also need to know what's going on and what to do about it, so they get the help they need. Otherwise, they just feel like somebody's listening and being kind and supportive, but we're not getting anywhere. We just, we're out done with our 50 minutes and we're worse than we were because we just had an upset. And then we're going to be mad all week and we've got to come back and do it again.
Got it.
It's very frustrating. That's why a lot of people think marriage counseling isn't any good, because a lot of people have had bad experiences.
Wow. Well, let me ask you, would you say there's out of the Gottman research that you discovered, right, in
Mhm.
regards to having a healthy marriage and the nature of that, what are the two most important things that stick out to you that you are most aware of that you help teach your couples?
Well, I learned a lot about the differences in the way individuals handle things between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we have similar intelligence and we say we're equal in every sense of just respecting each other, but we're created differently. We have different
Okay.
hormones. Our brains are different. We're built to be complementary.
Yeah.
And if you don't honor each other's strength that's complementary to you, where you're weak and they're strong, that sort of thing, you need to honor that side of the other person.
Yeah.
But the problem is we get competitive and we feel like we're being put down. And so we feel like if you're not like me, you're wrong. Men are very much like that with women.
Mm-hmm.
You're just always emotional, da 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 da. Well, they are built to be emotional because they also are built to have babies. And they're also built to care for babies, to be vigilant and concerned about the baby being in trouble or dying. Men
Mm-hmm.
are just reading the paper or watching the news, and they don't see everything because we
Yeah.
don't multitask. Women are
Mm-hmm.
wired like that. So we need to respect our differences, honor our differences, and be proud of each other and really work together. But otherwise, we're into ourselves and we're not happy because we're not getting our needs met and we feel like we're not. It's a big selfish trip, is what it is. A lot of people in
Mm-hmm.
our culture have been affected by the culture in a way that says, main thing is I got to get
Hey.
where I'm going to go and I need to get what I need to get. I need to have my needs met. And I'll tell you what, that's not the formula for good marriages. You don't get good marriages by being self-centered and being aggressive. It
Oh
just
my
doesn't work.
gosh. Mom, let me ask you, because a lot, has changed in the course of life, as you mentioned, from back in the day when marriages where people were starting getting counseled. What is the trend? I mean, again, I'm just a news watcher. I'm no expert. Are we seeing a lot more marriage breakdowns and divorce? Did people really work harder to stick together back then, or are we trying that again now? What have you seen in all your years in line of work of what's happening nowadays? 'Cause I feel like after the pandemic, a lot changed. I feel like a lot of people were giving up quickly. But again, this is just from what I've seen on the news. What about you professionally?
Well, the culture is having an adverse effect on people. I think that the culture is kind of saying to women, you need to be more like men, and the way to get what you want is get in his face and demand your rights, and that's exactly what doesn't work. It really makes things worse, actually. Um, and men are just kind of, well, whatever. If she wants to have her career, she can have her career. She wants to work. And so we're trying to accommodate each other, but what's not happening is we don't have enough connecting. See, the research all points to the need to have emotional connection with each other. And if you're working too many hours, if you're too stressed, if you're trying to do too many things at once, you're not doing the things you do when you court. Courtship is a lifelong process. You court throughout your marriage. You don't just court to get married. And then the game's on. Now we got to work and have these kids, da da da, or not have kids because they're too big a hassle. But people are just doing things that aren't working. Now, your question, there are a lot of people now coming to counseling. First of all, because we're starting to have success and they have a friend that went somewhere and had success, and they desperately don't want to have a divorce. Some have come out of families. In fact, the second generation now is desperately not to get divorced, to the point of I don't want to get married because I don't want to get divorced, because they had bad experiences with their mom and dad.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people that are married are really wanting to do whatever they can do to get help. And so I tell them, if you really want a good marriage, you can have one. I'll stick with you. I'll help you. We'll get her done. It's not rocket science, but there are principles you have to learn and skills you need to use, and you're going to get somewhere.
Wow.
And then, of course, they've got traumas, bad experiences of childhood, horrible problems with their parents or the dad or the mom or whatever, being in foster homes. Parents were immoral, all kinds of horrible things happening. But
Hmm.
even with traumas in childhood, you can work through those things with help, with professional help. You can deal with trauma and you can learn how to be close to each other. And you can have a good marriage, even if you've been traumatized, even if there are horrible things that happen. But it's more work, but it's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we just have a few minutes, 2 minutes left in the show only. Did you want to give us some advice? Maybe, how a couple can have a close, loving marriage. Is there maybe one sentence that describes it to us?
Well, the big thing is to really try to understand where they're coming from. We need to get into each other's shoes. We need to intimacy, especially for women. A man needs to feel like I've got to understand what's going on inside of her. I've got to understand her. That's what makes her feel loved and close. The connection is emotional. And it's not just talking, but it's understanding and getting on each other's wavelength. And there
Hmm.
are two wavelengths. Men talk about different things different ways than women do, and it's vice versa. But it can all be learned once you get motivated. We've got the research now, and we got people that are trained specialists now. If you want to
Hmm.
get help with marriage, you can find a research-based therapist that's experienced and has a good marriage themselves. Somebody that knows what they're doing and can really help you.
Yeah. And how do we reach out to you?
Well, I love for you too. I love my work, and if you're out there and you're hurting, give me a call. I've got some time. I could work with you.
Perfect. And how do we call you?
Well, why don't you just call me on my cell phone? It has an answering facet. Aletheia, I could give you a website. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
my cell phone is 406-370-3515.
Perfect.
And if you don't reach me, just leave your name and phone number, and I'll get back to you.
Thank you very much for everything. Looking forward to the next time we connect. And thank you for helping so many. Again, reach out to him, anyone, anywhere, if you need that help. Individual counseling, couples counseling, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Thank
the
you.
couples are basically coaching men and women to be
Got
better.
it. Thank you so much. You have a fantastic day, and we'll talk
Thank
soon.
you.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.